Welcome to another episode of Fault Lines. I am Adio, and I'm always joined by
Confidence Macharry.
Confidence. It's good to have you here.
Great to be back here.
Three big issues we're looking at this week, but I'll quickly start, as we always do, with Nigeria. And the biggest stories, from national security this week is the fact that General Christopher Musa is now back as Minister for Defense.
Yeah, for some people.
And and of course, second thing I wanted us to also touch on was the fact that, as part of the measures that President Tinubu is taking to sort of, rejuvenate or rejig or re-strategize national security is the fact that, the IGP has called for policemen, to leave every unauthorized VIP and return back to their police post, essentially for them not to be guarding, in code, VIPs across the country. But as far as I can remember, all through my adult life, every single Inspector General of Police in his first week in office always gave that order, to take away police officers who were working with VIPs across the country.
Yeah.
And that order had always been flouted. And in fact, it's gotten so bad that in more recent times, you have policemen guarding Yahoo boys. You have policemen. I mean, if you had a few change, you could hire a truck of policemen to escort you to the airport, down to the bar beach and have a good time, with policemen holding your champagne.
Asking
while
price
you're
of 150K.
Exactly. So it's become ridiculous, to such a point where there's absolutely no regard for the average policeman any longer. But more importantly, is the fact that this directive, as given by the current Inspector General of Police, has also been flouted to the point where they are now deploying assistant commissioners of police to the airports, to check whether policemen are still escorting some of these VIPs. And that shows you the amount of institutional corruption that we have in the Nigerian police force. And that's why I've always argued that if we're going to make progress with the Nigerian police, we have to completely disband the police and start from the scratch. I mean, it sounds outrageous, but the Georgians did it in 2004. They disbanded their entire police force due to institutional corruption. They believed the police could no longer be reformed, and they sacked 30,000 men, and they started from the scratch. They placed the priority on the quality of their hiring. They improved remuneration. They improved incentive. They provided oversight. They gave the policemen body cams, brought in citizens oversight. And guess what? A few years after the new police came on board, public confidence in the police moved from 10% to 80%. And the police earned the trust of the citizens, and it worked brilliantly. And I believe strongly that we have to pursue the Georgian model, disband this entire police force that is designed entirely for the protection of the elite and the Nigerian state and not the Nigerian people. Going on with this parody doesn't make any sense to me. The police has been abused so bad that you have a slight argument with your wife or your girlfriend, you can hire the police to intervene.
Somebody calls your wife a hoe on Twitter.
Just call. They're just there for the hire, and it makes no sense to me at all. And so going beyond just recalling police officers, I think we need to look at institutional reforms. And the police is too corrupt to reform itself. And we need a more radical approach for me, which is to entirely ban and start from the scratch. But I mean, I don't know what your thoughts is about the new chief of defense, the new defense minister.
Yeah.
If you think he's going to change the game, and why on earth we persisted with the two former politicians, governor of Jigawa State and governor of Zamfara State, as holding sway in the defense ministry.
So first of all, we need to first talk about where how Tinubu got these two guys that you just mentioned. That's Mohammed Abubakar Badaru, former governor of Jigawa, and then Bello Metawale as Minister of State for Defense. Very funny characters. And the reason why it's very funny because, Metawale was accused of he's still been accused of his successor in Zamfara for sponsoring bandits in the state. So he's somebody who has a lot of security baggages. And the fact that he was able to clear DSS screening for his ministerial appointment and El-Rufai did not. It speaks to a lot of politics. And so where this politics leads to is why Tinubu needed these two characters in his government. So on one hand, you could look at it as some sort of a reward for helping him, quote unquote, win the Northwest in 2023 election. Now, as to why these two failed, the defense ministry in Nigeria is not the kind of ministry that you come to expect to pull its weight in terms of national security in the country. And this is largely down to the fact that most of the heavy work and the heavy lift in terms of security in Nigeria is mostly done by the security forces. Yes, the military itself is under the defense ministry, but it's mostly about bureaucracy, pushing work, not necessarily about policy that you come to expect the defense minister to be in charge of. And so it was sort of easy. So much of the work that was being done in that military, at least in the outward-facing area, was done by Metawali. I remember a trip Metawali did to Turkey in 2023 or 2024, where they were looking for options for countering insecurity in the Northwest. And then they went to Turkey for getting drones. You know, Turkey is one of the world's largest leading exporters of drones. Bayraktar, TB2 drones and everything was very instrumental in the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan. We've seen its efficacy in Libya and several others. So he was there. So he was mostly the one that was really running around. But in terms of providing policy, he wasn't really active. So what many people will be expecting, I'm not one of them, is that when Chris Musa takes over office, as he has been confirmed by the Senate, that is going to drive this policy, is going to drive the kind of energy that is needed and everything. It remains to be seen. Much of my criticism for the Christopher Musa person has been from his role as Chief of Defense Staff. When he was Chief of Defense Staff, it was more about talk. And thinking about it, reflecting on my misgivings about him, I calm down a bit because the British model we copied in terms of military hierarchy and superiority, at the beginning, it's not the same thing we follow. So when Nigeria got independence, we had, I'm trying to remember the name, but it was a British officer that was the general officer commanding of the Nigerian army. And when he was about to leave in 1963, I think, he was tasked by the government, the Balewa government, to recommend people to take over his role. And then he had names like, I think, Samuel Ademulegun from the west. He had Aguiyi Ironsi from the east, and then he had Zakaria Malari from the north. Yeah. But then he gave all these three names their weaknesses and their strengths, and the government ended up, I think Nnamdi Azikiwe was very instrumental in picking Aguiyi Ironsi as GOC and everything. But after that, the coup in 1966 changed everything, and then the civil war that followed, we just simply abandoned the tradition we got from the British, where the Chief of Defense Staff is the most important and the most senior military officer in the country. So what we then did was we took operational command away from the Chief of Defense Staff and then democratized it to the three military departments. So I think in a way, again, back to what we were saying last week, it was about regime security to prevent one person from being so powerful as to challenge whoever the head of state was. So we have continued with that. So in the modern sense, the Chief of Defense Staff, who was Christopher Musa, was relegated to more of a talker, somebody who just goes to the media and says a lot of soundbites that some people would like to hear, some people castigate him for and everything. But in terms of operational control of the armed forces, it wasn't just there. It was just figurehead his role was more of a coordinator than an effective rule giver. You understand? So, which is why I think when Leo Irabo was appointed as Chief of Defense Staff by Buhari, when Buhari was leaving, some people felt that it was more of a lame duck role, that he's supposed to, given the kind of pedigree and the kind of person he was, he's supposed to be Chief of Army Staff, So why I say this is that normally how this is supposed to be operating is the various heads of the military, the Chief of Army Staff, Chief of Air Staff, Chief of Naval Staff, is supposed to report to the Chief of Defense Staff, who reports to the Defense Minister, who reports to the President. But what we see in Nigeria is the president bypasses all of these guardrails and then just goes ahead, calls the Chief of Army Staff and say, hey, I need to quell protest in Lekki Toll Gate. And then that one calls a battalion in Lagos, and then they go do their thing and everything. So now that he's here, you get to expect that most of the things he said during his screen, I was hearing things like not paying money to bandits. Yes, not paying anything. I'm inclined to think that it's all talk, things to excite people, because in 2022, I remember talking a lot about the proposed policy to outlaw ransom payments to bandits and all, but it all came to nothing. They indeed passed the bill that legally today ransom payments is is legal. So, but even at that, if you get kidnapped, you go and pay ransom without the police being involved, you're going to be in trouble. You know?
What should be his priority as, defense minister now? If you were to give him his marching orders, what do you think should be his priority? Would it be, for instance, making public schools safe again? Because many schools have been shut down in many parts of northern Nigeria because of fear of attacks. And mind you, that reminds me, there's supposed to be a safe school policy.
Safe school
initiative that was, rolled in some years ago, well funded and well resourced. I wonder whatever happened to the billions that went to that project.
They are investigating it in National Assembly today.
But, what should be his marching orders if you were to, sort of give him 1 year to measure his performance? What will be a priority for him?
Number one, it's to root out institutional incompetence and corruption in the military. And it's not your garden variety procurement fraud or any of those things. If you take a cursory look at all of the major security breaches we've had in Nigeria in the past 1 year, look at the Ilewata massacre, look at the schoolgirls abduction in Kebbi, there's something that hits you starkly, and it is that in every one of these incidents, there were intelligence reports warning that these things were going to happen. And in every one of these cases, the military was one of the people as an essential force by which the intelligence was given.
Yeah.
And they never did anything.
Yeah.
I recall this story I read in one of the attacks in Plateau State. I think it was around August or something. A community was being attacked, and there was, I think, Operation Safe Haven units from the Nigerian Army close by, and the community people told them, please come to our aid. They came in quite all right. But then they noticed that the people who were attacking them, the Fulani militias, were sort of, had superior firepower, had, more people and everything. So the unit's commander of Operation Safe Haven in that community who responded had to call the larger brigade some kilometers away for help. So the reinforcements came quite all right. And when they came, they stood idly by the roadside and watched their colleagues being killed. The person who made that call, the unit's commander, actually got killed in that fight. They refused to move. So the question we should be asking is, why are all of these things happening? Time and again, we keep hearing examples and examples and examples. So what I would tell the defense minister now is investigate these issues. Why are intelligence that are being given to the military, why are they failing? Then secondly, the next thing I would do is greater integration, synergistic operations between all of, not just the military, the armed forces in general, but the relevant security agencies. I don't want a situation where in the next 5 years, 10 years, we're still having the military carrying out operations across 36 states.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be done.
Yeah.
So if we have a situation where, as your Minister of Defense, Defense is homeland, I'm not even talking about the US, where the Minister of Defense is taking care of one frigate or one ship somewhere in the Pacific. We're talking about Nigeria. So if you have a case where you have soldiers or the military or whatever military unit is carrying out an operation in one place, there should be a target. Say, in 1 month, we are clearing all of the criminal elements that are hiding here. It could be whatever group, it could be Boko Haram, it could be ISWAP or anything. Give them a mandate and say, 1 month, clear everything there. Now, as you're clearing, you're not staying there. You understand? Yes, once in a while you may do mop-up operations, but your goal is not to stay there, is clear them and return to base. Now, as you're returning, you as Minister of Defense, you will now have to work with the Minister of Interior or the Minister of Police Affairs and make sure that as those people are withdrawing, the police is getting into those places. Much of the problem that we are having is that we have lost so much ungoverned spaces to criminal elements that it is virtually impossible to keep our own military troops in those areas without them coming under attacks. Now, the cause of this is there's a governance gap. So if you close that governance gap by providing security to those communities and equipping the police well enough, so the kind of intelligence that normally should be going to the military when they are stationed there, as an attack is going to be taking place, pass that thing through the channel from the DSS down to the police and make sure that they act on it. There should be consequences. So these are the two matching orders that we give it, because all of the things, procurement and everything, they already have it.
Yeah, I think that's quite fair. And if he does, I'd like to see him do quite well on that. And that will actually move the needle significantly. Yeah. We have to go a bit to the southern part of Africa. No, before we go that, let's touch on, a very familiar country in the Sahel, which is Mali. In recent weeks, the GMIN
Jamaat al-Nusra.
Yes.
Al-Muslimin.
Good try.
Yeah.
They've been making very serious advances.
Yep.
And this is a bit nostalgic of the Tuaregs, pre-2012.
Yeah.
What they have done in recent week was to cut off supplies of petrol, that's supposed to go across the country, leading to shortages, leading to hike in the prices of petrol. It would appear that there's a bit of momentum on their side. People are losing confidence in the central Malian government. In fact, I thought it was earlier this year where there were pockets of protests against the Goita regime, demanding a quicker transition to civilian rule. And two things are playing over the top of my head. First of all, I think it's important to also examine how the Malians got to where they are today, which is the fact that if you look at pre-2012, it was the discontent by the Tuaregs, the northern part of Mali, who felt they were excluded from governance, who felt not enough investments was going into northern Mali. Yeah. And they started their agitations, rallying around a local cleric who became more of an extremist, driven by extremist Islamic ideology, which became, which merged into, I think it started with the wider Maghreb terrorist network.
The Azawad Liberation Force.
Exactly, the Azawad Liberation Force. You then they had some sort of collaborations with the Islamists, and then, it became an entire tsunami where they were marching on
they had Amura Bitun and Sadain, Kabit, so about 4 of them. They later moved into JNIM in 2017.
Yes. Yeah. The Messina Liberation Front.
Messina.
Exactly. And so at some point, thanks to the French, which they now hate, the central government would have collapsed, entirely. Now, it looks like a similar thing is beginning to happen again. The central government seems weak. It seems momentum is on the side of, the terrorist organization. And it would appear that, the central Malian government are living on borrowed time. But more importantly, they seem to have formed some sort of a regional counter-terrorism force that's with Burkina Faso and Niger to put together some sort of, a response unit. I'm not sure how effective that is. Of course, I've always argued that, even the Nigerian government should have been a part of that counter-terrorism unit, whether by funding, whether by, providing basic operational support so that you can use it to also gather intelligence and preempt certain attacks in your own country. But ultimately, there are fears that if care isn't taken, the central government is losing popularity, it's losing legitimacy, momentum is on the side on the terrorist group. There's an anti-French sentiment, so you're not going to get help from the people that saved you in 2012.
You sure about that?
well, they might love the back door to come in, but there's a more reliance on the Russian government to provide some sort of buffer. Yeah. I wonder what the implications will be if Bamako falls again to these terrorists, and if it sorts of flows into Burkina Faso. What could be the fate of the entire, Sahelian region, and perhaps what this implication could be, for the Nigerian government?
Yeah, so I'm going to dive right into answering your questions as to what the implication would be. It will just be that we will now have the first state being led by Islamist groups in Africa. They've tried several times in Somalia; it hasn't really worked. We have the ADF trying to do the same thing in Congo, but it's a far-fetched dream. But if Mali does it will be the first. If Bamako falls, it will be the first in the region. And secondly, it would create a lot of pressure on the littoral states, on the coastal states. Mali borders a couple of states in the coastal West Africa. Senegal being one of them.
Southern side.
Yeah. So of course we've not seen Islamist attacks in Senegal, but once you have an Islamist government there, it's going to inspire the same movements in other places. And you mentioned Burkina Faso. There are not many people that know this. I mean, when you swallow pro-Traore propaganda on social media. It's not something you likely know. About 40 to 60% of the country is not under government control. It's being controlled by Islamist groups.
Yeah.
And you see all of the breakthroughs, quote unquote, that JNIM is doing in Mali. In Burkina Faso, they're taking quite a huge beating. And they locked in the civil war with the Islamic State Sahel province, which have been chopping away at their progress for quite some time. So it's likely going to put pressure on these other guys in Burkina Faso and Niger. As to your question concerning why the Nigerians are not part of the efforts for the counterterrorism efforts and everything. So what the guys in the Alliance of Sahelian States, the AES states, have come out with is a 5,000-man counterterrorism task force that is going to be operating in the tri-border area where the three countries meet. Nigeria is also proposing the same thing with ECOWAS. Nigeria has the ECOWAS plan is about 5,000, roughly the same size. But the problem is ECOWAS is big, so you need the input of several other people, funding and everything. Nigeria does not have the bandwidth to be funding all of that. But the challenge that these other guys will be having with their own proposal is that they do not have the kind of air power that you need to take out these guys. So you see, in the Liptako-Goma triangle, where Mali meets Niger and Burkina Faso, it's a madhouse that if you want to put boots on the ground, it's going to cost you a lot. You understand? It is far more easier for you to take out hundreds of terrorists if you're flying from the division, the newly created Nigerian military division in Sokoto, and taking them out with minimal force compared with if you're putting boots on the ground. And the mere fact that most of the air operations that the Malians have been carrying out have been largely centered on countering not what the Islamists are doing, that's JNIM is doing, but mostly what the Azawad separatists in northern Mali are doing. It tells you a lot. I mean, this is one of the reasons why, till date, Mali, since July this year, Mali and Algeria have not really been in good terms because the Malians flew a drone very close to the border with Algeria, and then those guys shut it down, and it's caused a whole lot of diplomatic, problem. In conclusion, I don't think that Bamako is going to fall anytime soon. At least not in my assessment. It's not in the immediate, and the reason why I say it's not in the immediate is because if these guys, JNIM now, since they've cut off fuel supplies and they've been taking so much of the hinterlands and everything, if they make a play to capture Bamako, they are going to likely lose. They're going to lose a lot of resources. Even if they win, it's going to be a Pyrrhic victory. Because that's where most of the militia is concentrated in, making sure that Bamako doesn't fall. But if you take that away, they also have to deal with the general consequences of getting not just the region, that's the wider region, to act against them, but also the international community. So you talked a bit about how the French have been chased away, and then I was laughing, Yes, the AES states seem to be anti-capitalist or, against the West and everything, but that hasn't really stopped them from collaborating with them, at the base level, because the Malian government under Colonel Assimi Goïta is currently in talks with the Americans. They've been getting him a couple of help, the details are not really that clear, but there is a whole lot of cooperation that is going on the ground that's sanctioned by the Trump administration and everything. So the international community will not like to see Bamako fall. So at the very least, what we're going to see is protracted negotiations between JNIM and the central government, where they try to eat away at their authority, at their power, try to make every law a propaganda material to show that the government is competent and everything. It remains to be seen how long that is going to go on for. But I do think that in the coming years, we may or may not see a reversal in what the fortunes of Mali is undergoing. Because to simply reverse this thing is, right now, it's not one of these things where you could say you could do abstract things like good governance. You understand? But if there's one good governance thing that I would say that the Malian government should be doing is stop when you're doing all of these raids, stop targeting civilians, man. Stop all of these things when you'll be killing civilians for collaborating with JNIM or you're with the support of the Russia Africa Corps, you're dropping bombs on civilian villages. It's just simply making the case for these other guys. And that's the propaganda tool they're using,
So we're going to be locked in this vicious cycle for at least a decade, if you asked me.
That's some assessment.
What a shame.
I mean,
what a shame.
See, in conclusion, I always say this: the Sahel is gone. The Sahel is gone because In 2020, when the Americans warned us that this thing is going to be a problem, that the jihadis are making a play for coastal West Africa, then the only coastal West African state that was undergoing terrorism, or in this scale as we're seeing now, was Nigeria.
Yeah.
As I speak to you, since 2021, 2022, Benin is under attack.
Yeah.
The northern portion, two departments under Benin, Kora and Elibora. They're under Alibori, yeah, they're under attack. Togo is under attack. There was a report from Reuters late last year that says that JNIM guys from Burkina Faso are using Ghana as a staging area. They're using as a refueling area by which they launch attacks into these other places. I speak to you. Ivory Coast also had similar problems, but they quickly moved, to deal with the incursions, by the terrorist group. But now it's going to get worse because most of the people that are fleeing the terrorism and all of the crisis in Mali and Burkina Faso are moving to northern Ivory Coast. So there is hardly any coastal state in West Africa that is free right now.
Again, perhaps that calls for a bit of continental leadership. I'm not sure where that leadership is going to come from.
Yeah.
But there has to be continental leadership, that rolls up its sleeves, pull up its socks to get rid, of this terrorist incursion into many of these African states. But that's a conversation for another day, because we have just about 5 minutes left, and I wanted to quickly touch on Zambia. There's a new constitutional change being proposed in Zambia, which obviously creates more seats in parliament, gives the president,
Hakainde
Hichilema a lot more powers. Civil society groups who are throwing tantrums that there wasn't enough consultations and it was going to favor the incumbent party. But there are also wider issues in Zambia. Inflation has been raging high, commodity prices have tanked, so unemployment has soared. It all looks like the president had sold them a boogie. Their livelihoods aren't improving. The rule of law seems to be faltering. And Zambians are completely left in a limbo because this was somebody that they had confidence in who was going to turn their country around. And unfortunately, there seems to be a slight drift towards authoritarian tendency, to become the next strongman in the southern part of Africa. And it appears to me that the young Zambians do not want to see that kind of precedent. Mm-hmm. And I fear and I wonder if it continues to persist in this direction. Is there another protest lingering in Zambia? How far will these protests go? And more importantly, when will African leaders learn to begin to feel the pulse of the majority of young people in their country and govern their country in a way that gives these young people hope and not consistently focus on expanding some sort of empire that exists in their minds and just want to relieve, the Mugabes and relieve, these strongman tendencies that preceded them.
So one of the things that strike me the most about this Zambian constitutional crisis is the galvanization of civil society in opposition to this bill. The name of the bill is, I think, Bill number 7 of 2025. It's supposed to do things like proportional representation, special seats, remove term limits for mayors, and also remove the components where somebody who's running for election, especially for the office of the president, will be disqualified based on charges such as corruption and all of the associated acts. So they're removing that provision to make it possible that beyond just corruption, you can be disqualified on any ground. So in a way, people who are saying that this is anti-democratic, they sort of have a point. But it is all the more shocking, especially to you, that somebody who came in as a reformer is doing this kind of a thing. There's something Nietzsche, my favorite German philosopher, said if you gaze too deeply into the abyss will gaze back into you. This is what Lord Acton said about power corrupting and absolute power corrupting absolutely. But the thing is, if you look at it, if you divorce it from what's happening in Zambia, and then look at it from across the world, there is a growing rise of illiberalism. I think it was Farid Zakaria that wrote about it in 1997, where he noted that even the decline or the end of the Soviet Union, some 6 years prior, where people thought that we've come to the end of history, that's to quote Francis Fukuyama, that the world will be a state where will be a lot more prosperous and democratic. We haven't really achieved that kind of an Eldorado. And even now, in the past couple of years, we seem to have had now a hybrid democracy more than full democracy.
Oh, yes.
It's even worse now with the US now, which in the past, whenever you look at human rights indices, the US used to dominate. Now we are having the rise of authoritarian democracy, majoritarian democracy in a way in the US, as they are now exporting to other parts of the world. So Zambia is one of those microcosms where you could see, like the president Hakainde Hichilema is a product of his time. You know, the person that got into office previously was trying to be a shining light in a country where you've had the likes of Michael Sata, Edgar Lungu, and the likes. They've simply subverted what their founding father Kenneth Kanda proposed gave to them. You know, so but now he's simply acting on what he's seeing across the world with the rise of illiberalism, trying to open the constitution. In fact, this was exactly what led to the latest coup in Mali in 2020 when President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta was removed from office. As to the possible corrective measures, you know, in terms of what the young citizens of Zambia, especially the young people, can do, I don't think that a protest is far off. I mean, they're in the same region where the Malagasy people in Madagascar did their own protests and everything. So it's quite likely that they will rise. They've seen things from Nepal. They've seen the Gen Z 212 protests in Morocco. They've seen what the Kenyans have done. They've seen what the Tanzanians are planning to do later this month and everything. So I think it might inspire that. And the reason why it might not inspire that so immediately is because the bill, no matter how much of problem it has gotten, is just still subsided at should I say, committee level at the moment. It has not gone beyond first reading. It's still stuck in Parliament. And the mere fact that the government is refusing to just totally disband the bill tells you that this is a purveyor of something bad that is to come. I don't know when it's going to come. I don't know, but I'm just saying that I'm totally not going to rule out it's been a problem for not just the president, but the entirety of the region. Because if you're having Zambia that has copper exports that are declining, and then they're having a lot of problems on the commodity markets, and you have a lot of young people protesting against it, I think is a harbinger of something really bad. But what it portends for the region is that we might actually see Southern Africa, which is usually one of the shining lights in terms of democratic indices, just start entering into the same leagues as you get to see North Africa and as well as West Africa, which really, really sad. It's my neighborhood, but it is what it is. You know?
I mean, it's this is where we draw the curtain. It's been great talking to you as always, and we'll do this again next week.
Absolutely, it's been nice.
All right then.